Good morning, everyone. Today we're joined by Rebecca Ryan, Provost's Distinguished Associate Professor in our Department of Psychology, and she also serves as a faculty member in our McCourt School of Public Policy. And Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Let's jump right in. Your scholarship explores issues related to the development and well-being of children. To begin, could you offer a few words on the sorts of questions that have been most central to your work?
Sure thing. All of my work focuses on parenting and the role that parents play in children's, mostly their early development. And I think about things and study things like the quality of the interactions between parents and their young children, and how the quality of those interactions influence children's social, emotional, cognitive outcomes in their development. And I also think about sort of what people think of as kind of the quantity of parents' time that children receive. What kinds of activities are parents doing to foster children's development, like reading, playing games, taking them to do enriching activities? And I guess, my main premise is that parenting is a hard job. Parenting is a hard job for everyone, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their resources. But it can be a particularly hard job if you're parenting in the context of economic strain and a lot of the stressors that accompany low income and accompany poverty. And so a lot of my work thinks about what kinds of things we can do, usually in policies and programs, to support parents, particularly those who are trying to do this hard job in the context of economic strain.
Got it. Got it. Now, you lead our Child Development and Social Policy Lab. Can you describe some of the focus of the lab's work and the kinds of questions and outcomes you're hoping the lab contributes to?
Sure. And I should say, I co lead the Child Development and Social Policy Lab with my colleagues, Professors Anna Johnson and Deborah Phillips. And most broadly, the lab is really trying to think about ways to identify programs and policies that can support child development for all children, regardless of their family background, regardless of the economic situations into which they were born. I focus on the home environment and things we can do to support parents in the home and children in the home as a result. Deborah and Anna really focus on children's early care and education context, childcare, universal pre-kindergarten, those kinds of early care and education settings, and what we can do to make those better and support those and make them more available and affordable. And we have these dual foci because we really think these are the two main contexts that young children interact with. They're at home with parents, and they're at school or in their childcare settings with their caregivers and teachers. And if we can support those two environments, particularly for children in economic risk, then we can hopefully create more equitable outcomes for all children when they enter school. And so right now, my focus is really on, one of my focuses is on food insecurity and the role that food insecurity plays in children's early development. And in particular, the impact that food insecurity can have on parents and parents' well-being, and how that can then impact kids. And so we're doing a study of a program called the Power Packs Project, which is a local private nonprofit food assistance program in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And what Power Packs does is really cool. They provide packages of food to elementary school children, including fresh meat, fresh dairy, milk, vegetables, and accompanying recipes that the children take home and give to their parents for the parents to use to cook a meal, hopefully with the child, to cook a meal that may last them a few days over the weekend. The idea being that over the weekend, children don't have access to free and reduced price school meals.
Sure.
And what we're doing, we're studying the program in lots of different ways, but one of the things we started doing last January was doing daily diaries with the parents in the program. Every day they get a text message and we ask them about their daily level of food insecurity, parents' mood, parents' behavior, child mood, and child behavior. Because we're trying to understand first, what is the impact of increases or decreases in food insecurity on these family functioning outcomes? And of course, we also want to know, what role does Power Packs play? What role does food assistance, I should say, play in helping families? We really want to get an estimate of what that impact is, which will inform these kinds of programs all over the country.
Sure, sure. Now, as you've shared, your scholarship has looked broadly at the relationships and the effects of a child's socioeconomic status and external environment on their
Mhm,
development and well-being. Can we take that a little bit deeper on this first aspect, factors related to socioeconomic disadvantage?
mhm.
Talk about the kinds of circumstances that can shape the direction of a child's life.
Yeah, I mean, so I go back to the focus of my research, which is really parents, and the idea that being a parent is hard, no matter what your circumstances are. So the kinds of things, the kind of questions I'm asking are, what is the specific role? What is the impact of economic strain and all the stressors that accompany low income and poverty? What's the impact on parents? And how does that then impact kids? And one of the things we know from the literature broadly is that economic strain can elevate parents' emotional stress levels, and even elevate their depressive symptoms. And elevated stress and depression, in turn, can impact parents' capacity to interact in sensitive and stimulating ways with their kids. We know specifically that food insecurity, particularly food insecurity experienced by parents in the form of skipping meals, cutting back on food. We know that this undermines adults' capacity to regulate their emotions. And so much of parenting involves regulating one's emotions. Right now, my doctoral student, Caitlin Hines, is using our data from the Power Pack study, these daily diaries I talked about.
Mhm.
She's looking at how daily changes in different aspects of food insecurity, things like skipping meals, cutting back on food, worrying about food and where you're going to get it, how daily changes in those kinds of food insecurity indicators predict elevated, how an increase in food insecurity predicts elevated parent depression and sadness, elevated irritability, predicts a higher likelihood the parent will lose their temper with the child. It also predicts child misbehavior and child sadness. And so we're really trying to kind of understand these mechanisms and how then providing food assistance and food support can halt that process.
Sure, sure. Now, last spring, you and your colleague Sandra Calvert offered advice for teacher parents dur-
Hmm.
during a pandemic,
Yeah.
sharing guidance for parents who were immediately called upon to supplement their children's education. Can you share a little bit about how you initially framed this guidance for parents? And as we've now operated in this way now for more than a year, would you adjust any of your advice for parents who are continuing to support their children's education? What have we learned over this past year?
I know. I mean, it's so funny when I think back to that time, I too had all of a sudden overnight, like every parent across America, become an overnight teacher in my home. I all of a sudden was running a homeschool and trying to obviously work and find time for myself. So as I recall, I think I focused on parents making sure that they take care of themselves and their own mental health. That amid all this, you take time out, take a walk, take a break, do what you need to do to protect your own self from elevated levels of stress, because that's ultimately going to help your child. I think Sandy focused a lot on the positive side of virtual learning. Sandy Calvert, studies how intelligent characters can be used in things like apps and even video games to help particularly young children get engaged in the learning process and learn. And I think, you know, her that advice to kind of engage in these apps was really prescient, because that has become such a big part of what the learning experience, particularly for kids in elementary school, has become this year. And I think that most parents are probably pleasantly surprised with how these virtual, how online schooling and how these virtual educational programs have worked. And so I wouldn't change my advice, but I would only stress that we've learned that these kinds of applications, particularly the ones that are free to download and the ones that involve interaction between the child and an intelligent character, where the character is kind of modulating the instruction based on the child's level and progress, I think we've learned a lot about how effective these programs can be, and how equitably they can be distributed if parents have at least access to a device.
Sure, sure. And then this semester, you're teaching a seminar on current research on children, families, and parenting, which
Mhm.
I think you've taught before. How are your students engaging with the question, especially at this moment during the pandemic? What are the kinds of
Yeah,
conversations you're exploring with your students?
it's interesting. I said to you before we started recording that I feel like in some ways I'm having the richest, most engaged conversations with my students now, perhaps ironically via Zoom, than I had when I've ever before when I have taught this class. And I think one reason might be that all the topics that I cover in the class, I've covered the same exact topics, but all those topics are even more salient now in the context of COVID. So what do we talk about? We talk about parents' time investment in children and how that can be really difficult when both parents are working, and they're or family structure makes it so that you have a single parent and one parent has to do two jobs. So we talk about family structure. We talk a lot about economic strain and low income and how that can impact families. And we talk a lot about the programs and policies that can be put in place to support families, particularly families facing economic risk. All of these topics have been important to me for years, but I think right now in mid COVID, they're even more salient. So we've been talking every week about the incredible spike in food insecurity, for instance,
Right.
in the United States throughout COVID. So, before COVID, about 15% of US households with children experience food insecurity, which is quite a bit actually.
Right.
But the rates are now up to 40% of households with children are experiencing food insecurity post-COVID, particularly as a result of job loss and or income loss. Um, and so we know that all of these stressors that we talk about are even more salient now, to children and to families. And it's really kind of enlivened in some ways or made more important our discussions about things like food stamps and public programs to support families, subsidized childcare. All these sorts of questions have become even more salient now in the context of COVID. And
Sure.
another really interesting topic that has come up this semester in a way that it has never come up before, at least more of my students want to talk about this topic than ever before, and that is mental health for parents,
Mhm.
and mental health for children. But a lot of students are thinking about how we can, strengthen community mental health programs to help parents through crises, strengthen community mental health and school-based mental health to help children through crises. I can't remember a time when mental health came up as much
Mhm.
as an important kind of public charge. And I think that, to me, really speaks to the salience of mental health issues amid COVID for everyone,
Yeah.
our students, families,
Yeah.
everyone in the United States.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for taking this time. It's been a
Sure.
joy to be able to have this conversation with you. In closing, is there a message you'd like to share with our community?
I mean, I've talked a lot here as much as I can, I think, about food insecurity and the role that food insecurity can play in families' lives, and about how food insecurity has really spiked during COVID right here in DC and all over the country. And for those who are watching this and want to think about how to help the community, there are local food assistance programs all over the country, like the Power Packs Project in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and also like something called the DC Food Project right here in DC, which is a lot like Power Packs in that it provides food packs for DCPS school children to take home on the weekends. So if you're thinking about what ways you can support families right now, I think contributing to local food assistance programs in money or in your volunteering is an excellent way to do that.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you. I'm so grateful to you for sharing your perspectives and taking so much time to be with us
Of course,
for this weekday series. I'm deeply grateful to you.
of course. Thank you so much for having me.
And I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you. For every Hoya, everywhere.